All right, well, I guess, hi, everybody. I'm Hannah, or the Obanoth, or Theo Banoth, or whatever you feel like calling me from the internet. Normally when I do demos and painting demos, I just kind of talk while I work and just kind of explain through my thought process and kind of through what I'm doing and just add little tips and bits about my decisions along the way. It can be annoying to only listen to me talk, so if you have a question or want me to elaborate about something or anything, please just say something back to me. It definitely is helpful to have some kind of interaction, just because that lets me know what you guys want to hear. Otherwise, I'm just going to like nonstop talk for an hour or so. So there you go. Okay, so this is also kind of a shameless plug for my paintbrush set. Wow, made by Trekell Art Supplies. They didn't ask me to do that. I actually really do just like these brushes. I paint almost exclusively with flat brushes. I would say pretty much exclusively with flat brushes. Flat and long hair. One of the things that really defines my painting style is, kind of the blocky shapes and the rectangular mark making, and all of that comes from using brushes with squared off bristles, which is no surprise. So I think we're just gonna jump in here. I brought 4 different reference photos. I think that it might be worth talking a little bit about why I use reference and how. I think I might choose this one. I also have a bird, a bee, and a lion. Does anyone have a strong preference? I have not committed to any of this. Maybe this guy, lemur? Okay, all right, let's do lemur. The reason why I use reference, even though my artwork doesn't usually look like the reference when it's done, is because it gives me kind of a North Star. Even if I know or more or less know what something looks like, I think that it's helpful to have something to point back to for the sake of anatomy. Especially with things that you might think that you know what they look like, but ultimately the nuance in the shapes is something that people often assume wrong. So reference 100%, even if the piece that you're making is going to be wildly different colors or even caricatured shapes. I'm using acrylic. I'm using Liquitex soft-bodied acrylic. I use 3 or 4 different brands of paint, just kind of depending on what's available. One of my most frequently asked questions is about what paint is that? And a lot of my technique is not specific to the brand of acrylic that I use. I'll show you how I get flat opaque mark making, but the brand of paint really is not the secret sauce here. You can do this with pretty inexpensive paint too, and if that's something that you care about, I can recommend options for cheaper paint too that you can get the same effect. Okay, so my first step is I'm going to look at this and I'm going to determine my color palette. I'm only going to put out the paint onto my palette that I want to use in this piece. That sounds silly and redundant because of course, but a lot of people give themselves full palettes of paint first and then create a painting with the idea that they want it to be a limited palette or a specific palette and end up not being faithful to that because they have so many options, and as you're working you kind of forget what your initial goal was. So in order to make sure that I'm going to land with my palette where I want to, I am only going to give myself access to a certain number of colors. That is just a human monkey brain trick that I do. This is black, white, and brown. That is super boring, and we're not going to do that. So I am going to make some decisions about what I want to do with this palette. I think I'm going to lean the black more towards blue. I think that I'm going to make the eyes probably more red and yellow than brown, and I think we're gonna do something funky with the background color to balance it all out. So that's about as much decision making as I do with my planning. All of my work is alla prima, so I do everything without a sketch and without much of a plan aside from that plan that I just said out loud. So I had not chosen which thing I was even going to do until 5 seconds ago. So, you should be able to basically pick up and just have at it with this style. I think that it makes your work look fresher and also lets me work fast, which is a big part of kind of what's important to me with my work. Okay, step one, sketch. I give myself a sketch that is really loose, and I do this knowing that I'm going to cover most of it back up with paint. I do all of my sketches with paint. I do that because if you use charcoal or pencil or things, I find that it gets dust in the paint when you start to paint over it, and I don't like having to take a break to like put fixative or something to stop it from doing that. So I do my sketches with paint, and I do it with a light version of a color that's going to be in the painting. So because I'm going to do the painting with blue heavy, I'm going to use a light, not super different from my panel color here as my drawing color. So oh yeah, the board has a layer of matte medium on it. I use clear primer. I don't like painting on white because I feel like it throws my kind of value balance off. So I like to start with neutral. And I find that a wood tone feels really neutral to me. I find that to be a really ignorable color. So that's why I use clear primer. You can also use clear gesso. I prefer matte medium because I like that it is a smoother surface than gesso. Gesso can be more gritty. And because I want all of my marks to be super clean and hard edge, matte medium is just the decision that I have made over time as my primer. So I primed this at home, single layer of matte medium, let it dry overnight. Okay, so make sure this is in the right spot. So, all right, so pretty loose sketch, again, knowing that we're gonna paint back over it.
Kendra said she appreciates how thorough you are in your explanations of your process.
Oh, good. Cool, because I'm rambling, man. If you... Okay. So can you still... All right. The drawing is light, so it might be a little hard to see on screen here, but it'll show back up. Okay, so super loose. When I am composing an image, I make sure that all of the edges of my subject are either about half an inch, quarter inch away from the border, or that they hang off of the border. So about a finger width away from the edges of panels, unless it's something that's going to fall all the way off the side. That is kind of basic composition 101, but the point of doing the sketch is so that things don't accidentally butt up against the edges of your panel. That creates weird tension points, and it makes it really hard to look at the image visually because you end up being, whether you know it or not, like really distracted by there being like touch points where they shouldn't be. So that's another big part of why I start with an initial sketch, is just to make sure that I'm not gonna run up against any sides. Let's see. Okay, that's probably good. So sketch is truly just a couple of guidelines, and the entire thing is going to be covered up in like the first two colors that I put down. So I don't put a lot of pressure on the sketch, just to give me somewhere to start. And then when I work, I go big brush to small brush. So the first amount of time on this piece, we're going to be using a larger brush. Big to small shapes is my whole thing. You know, it's really about not getting caught up in details for a while. That is the kind of blocky effect that you get with my work is because of the big to small layers. So when I find when people try to replicate my work, sometimes it ends up just looking like just like an ocean of little rectangles, which is not really what's happening. It is really not the way that this is supposed to work. The idea is that you avoid your smallest brushes until you absolutely need them. So we're going to start pretty big here. I do not put medium in my paint. I use acrylic pretty much straight up, but what you're seeing me doing, hopefully seeing me doing here, is working the paint. This is how you get flat mark making. Even if you're not stirring anything into it, I'm doing this with a damp brush, but what you're doing is you are working the elasticity of the pigment and the binder. This is the thing. This is the how do you paint opaque, what paint is that? It's this, truly. It is improving the consistency of your paint. Acrylic is plastic and it separates. Even if it doesn't look like it, and when you pour it out and it makes a nice little puddle and it looks perfect, it isn't. You have to stretch it. And this act here is the entire thing about painting opaque. That's it. That's 100% the secret. People don't usually like that answer and still ask, what paint is that? Again, the answer today is Liquitex, which is very good paint. But
you said you weren't using any water?
I'm using a touch of water. It's mostly just about having a damp brush. Okay, so when I paint, I say that I spend more than half of the time on my palette instead of on the painting. A lot of time is spent on getting your paint corrected. And I mix one single color at a time. So I now have this kind of blue. So I'm just going to pick an area and I'm going to make a shape. So the slow, long mark making here. If it starts to get sticky, just re-wet your brush. But because I have mixed and worked and stretched out the acrylic, it is very even. Man, it is so windy. For all of you on Zoom, it is crazy windy here. Okay. So I am not hyper committed to my reference, again, remember? So I'm kind of putting marks where I feel they could go, but because I'm going to paint layers and layers on top of each other here, it matters a little, but it doesn't really matter that much where all of these shapes are at this stage. That's true for most of the painting process, actually, is that it's in flux and that you can always paint over stuff.
When you're making these shapes, are you thinking about value right now, or just the...
Yeah, sort of. So I am thinking about value, but I'm going to keep everything pretty mid-tone until I get further down. I am using probably like almost a 50% blue right now for like some of these grayish areas in here. As I build this up and as I kind of make decisions about focal points and stuff, I'll go darker in areas where I want more attention. I'm planning on having darker shapes kind of around the eyes and stuff. So I'll come back to that, but this is kind of placeholder. It's just sort of beginning to carve out my subject on the panel. All of the painting videos I post online are sped up about 3 times. So watching me paint in person looks comparatively a little bit boring. I promise the whole thing really does take about an hour. But when you see it on my social media, it looks like everything is like whoosh, 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 you know. It really is not exactly like that in real life. Okay.
No, I like the real life speed, because you watch so many of those and like, why am I not done in 10 minutes?
I know.
It's so long. It takes them long too.
Well, and I mean, the thing I was saying about how much time is spent on my palette, all of that is erased in those videos. So all that you're really seeing is the part where paint goes on here, which is why I think partially why everyone assumes that all of the work is being done by the paint, because you don't see all of the labor on the other side that comes in with like, you know, trying to fix it and mix it and correct it and all this stupid stuff. So yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna switch to a lighter color. I'm literally mixing it into the last color's puddle. If you're curious about my palette, it is a piece of cardboard with wax paper taped to it, which is cheap and effective. I prefer this to paper palettes, and I also, because I do this kind of alla prima thing, I really don't try to save paint. So like after I'm done painting, after I'm done working, I basically am just gonna rip this page off and throw it in the trash. Some people have systems that let them like, you know, save their paint and they put it in the freezer, they put it in a wet box or something. That is all fine and wonderful, but I have found, again, maybe just psychologically, that that not feeling like painting requires 1,000 steps for prep or cleanup really gets me to work a lot more, because I don't feel like it's such a squeeze every time, and I don't feel like, well, if I'm gonna sit down and paint, I have to do 25 things and then I have to do this big cleanup thing. You know, it doesn't feel like that big of a deal to sit down and work on something for a minute. I also leave my paintbrushes sitting in water 100% of the time, which makes the internet really, really mad.
That makes me mad, Hannah.
I know. It makes everybody mad. But I'm serious. If it were messing up my brushes, you would be able to tell with my work, right? It's not. I know, it really does make people mad. If I were painting with oil and it were sitting in turpentine all the time or something, then okay. But it's acrylic and it's sitting in water.
The ferrule where the ferrule touches the handle isn't soaking in water, it should be okay.
It is.
See? That makes the handle want to expand and contrast, and then it'll make the heads fall off.
It's not happening to me. I don't know. It's going fine. I've been doing it this way forever. Right now, they're in water to here. They're fine.
That can't be part of your sales pitch.
Oh man.
100% of the time in water all the time.
It's so funny. I'm on TikTok and I get comments that are like, "Oh my God, you leave your brushes. They're sitting in the water. Get those out of there." Like, look, man, if it were destroying my brushes, of all people, I promise I would know, because like the need to have perfectly shaped brushes is really significant for me, and like if it were wrecking them, I would be the first to know, but it's not.
How long before you need to replace your brushes?
I use my brushes almost every day, and I replace them, I don't know, some weeks to some months, depending on what shape. Yeah, kind of just depends. The reason why I leave them in water is because, well, first of all, it seems to be inconsequential, but the main reason why I do that, honestly, is because dehydrating and rehydrating my brushes is where I find most of my bristle splay. So like when I dry them and clean them and whatever, and then let them sit and dry and then get them wet again, those are the brushes that I find don't come back the same the next time. Certainly after 10 times, they don't come back the same. Maybe this is an issue with just not cleaning them very well, but like at this point, I have just found that not dealing with it at all works fine for me. So I'm just, you know, I don't know. I'm all about, you know, kind of rethinking the concept of like professionalism when it comes to studio practices, because I think that some of it can be really stifling, and ultimately discourage you from working. So, you know, if I were like scraping a glass palette every time I had to work, or if I had to like clean my brushes carefully with all this stuff every time I had to work, honestly, I would work less, you know? So a lot of the things that I do are based on like quick and dirty, you know, it functions for me. I can paint for 45 minutes and not feel like I have to do half an hour of prep and cleanup in order to do it. And that lets me kind of work every day, you know, so that I can pick up, I put down a little bit of paint, I get distracted and walk away. That's fine. I don't feel bad about that. And that's been a real game changer for me, just in terms of my productivity.
How many paintings do you do a day?
I can only do like 1 to 3 paintings a day, depending on how involved they are and how interested in them I am. The slow, careful mark making thing is great, except I burn out and like my back hurts and I'm tired and my eyeballs hurt from staring, you know? So I have like a physical limitation, I think, on how much I could paint. Also, I think the alla prima, like the on-the-fly decision-making thing, maybe is like a brain exercise sometimes that like, at a certain point, I'm just fried. Like I can paint for 3 hours and I'm maxed. I think if I painted more loosely, I wouldn't be that way, but yeah. So far this entire thing, we only have 2 colors down, but they have all been based off of blue and white. So we're not getting too freaky yet, but I'm using that as a base so that I can build color and pops of color and things on top of it. So we're starting real simple here. Okay, so this is almost black in my source image. This is probably 75% blue that I'm using. Everybody that paints has been told or kind of understands that white is a highlight color. Black is also a highlight color. So saving black for your focal points the way you save white for your focal points is an opportunity to kind of double tap your highlight areas. So I don't use pure black until the very end, like pure white. I'm kind of more refining shapes a little bit here, but also it doesn't resemble the reference very much yet. We're just sort of establishing shape areas still. So after we get to what I always call full coverage, which is when the entire painting has paint on it, then we can start building and rendering. Full coverage is probably the time-consuming part, just because you're laying down all of your big areas, and then from there you get to start doing noodly stuff and deciding individual like smaller shapes. So this part might be the longest part, but from here, then we have freedom to do anything that we want. Mixing, 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 little touch of water. The how much water question comes up a lot, and it absolutely depends on your environment. It's dry and windy in here, so this is taking more water than if I work in my home studio, which is just how it goes. you should be able to feel it. If the paint feels sticky, it needs water. And if it's separating on your palette, then it has too much water and you need more paint, or you can just keep mixing it and aerating it and get it to evaporate a little bit. But it's kind of a dance. By the way, attendees, I am raffling off this painting and also a Liquitex paint set and a question mark box of surprise secret goodies I brought after this. Ooh. Still in frame there? All right. So I am looking at my reference to inform some of the shapes that I am making, but I am really not glued to it. This is always true. Like right now, I still have this dark-ish black, but it's not, well, darkish blue rather. I know that it is not the darkest blue that I'm gonna get to, but while I have it, I keep referencing back like, okay, I think a place where I could put another little mark, how about here-ish? Okay, inside the ear, all right, that makes sense. So then I use that information to make my own shape there, right? So it's really not about copying, it's just about informing. So, you know, you look at your reference just to get a feel for an idea of where you could put down your next mark. My reference imagery comes from a lot of different places. Recently, I put out on Instagram a call asking for wildlife photographers, and I bought a bunch of people's photos to use as reference. So this came from somebody. A lot of the time, because my work is so different than the reference, if it's my own work, sometimes we use reference that I don't really credit or show because it comes out so drastically differently than the source. This because it's being shown on camera and because it, you know, is sort of the point of this is to talk about the reference. I cite and credit, so that it's watermarked. You can find out who these things are. And if I share this, then I will cite the photographer. If you are curious about best practices for stuff like that, it's a good idea to use reference from human beings, not just from Google. And if you do use reference from human beings, you should get their permission or you should credit them. You know, it's sort of a respect for the work of photographers thing.
We have a couple questions from Zoom.
Sure.
Do you have time to practice drawing, or is your time, keeping her drawing technique sharpened via the number of paintings she produces?
I go on little bouts of being interested in drawing. I, for a while, got really into figure drawing just in my home studio. So like there's a bunch of websites that'll just flip like nude figure images for you. And I do that every once in a while just because it doesn't let me be so like hyper controlled the way that I am with my painting stuff. So I kind of do it for fun, but it's not something that I do all that much. I would say that I can draw, and I used to spend more time drawing, but at this point, I think that the drawing that I do is mostly just relevant to like the building of paintings. So it's not a big part. It's not a big part of my life at this moment.
And somebody else wants to know if the black and white paint has skimmed over on the palette yet if you don't spray them with water.
Totally, yeah, you gotta mix it again. Yeah, you gotta keep mixing your paint. So this is another thing that frustrates people is that I mix only a very small amount of paint at a time. And what happens when it dries? You make it again. It actually is a really good way to learn color and color mixing because it forces you to pay attention to how you got there in the first place so that you can recreate it. This is kind of cheating because this is only white and blue. So this is really easy to get back if it if it skims over or whatever, but you know, but generally it is just good forceful practice because it makes you think about how you got there. I do that to myself a lot. It actually, I credit learning color a lot to that part of this practice. Having to like observe a color that I made and then make it again is hard, or used to be really hard. So that definitely, you know, it's part of it. Okay, I'm adding a color. I'm adding a yellow color. One of the best pieces of color advice I ever received was when you mix any color, like anything white or black, you should do it chromatically. So you should do it with a color included. I'm about to make a lighter color to go on top of this lightest blue that we have. Right now, this piece is very, very mid-tone, and it'll stay that way a little bit longer. But because I want to go lighter, and because everything pretty much is blue and white, I think that we should start pressing it tonally in a direction. So I'm adding a little bit of yellow for my next step to lighten. One of the things I can do here is I can test it by if you can see on my palette, I can literally show what it's going to look like on top of my previous color by using my palette instead of testing it on the painting itself. So I look at this and I think that is too light. I can tell here, acrylic paint dries a little bit darker than when you put it on your palette. So you kind of got to account a little bit for that. But you can use your palette to test your colors with each other, and I do that a lot. That's maybe a little better. Okay, so this is kind of looking greenish, but it is adding a little bit more visual interest to my palette here. It's also a little bit warmer, and because we're moving into our white light areas, I think that might be nice. I am still using the largest brush that I have today, by the way. So the temptation to start making little bitty shapes and stuff is real, but we're gonna fight that. Another question I get a lot is about the dry time. When you paint really thin like this and you don't add medium to your paint, individual shape areas here dry like in 30 seconds. So I kind of move from area to area to let things dry. Like I won't touch this mark I just made for a minute. But I'm not like, I'm not dealing with dry time really, which also has to do with this kind of mixing and only water technique. It means that I can just kind of keep working, keep moving throughout the piece. I'm gonna try to correct that a little. So we're still using the biggest brush, but I am starting to make slightly more decisive, slightly smaller shapes.
We have another question on Zoom. What was the biggest challenges you faced while starting your art career and your business?
That's tricky. I think that maybe one of the biggest surprises when you like try to do the art career thing is how much time you spend not painting. Like all of the other stuff, the studio maintenance, the priming and varnishing, the emails, the website and the social media and the online store and the projects and the clients and the, you know, the getting your materials and everything, like all of that stuff takes a crazy amount of time. And I think that that was one of the lessons that I learned was like, oh, you actually need to pay attention to stuff like differently than you think that you do. It really is not all creative. I am a big, I'm very type A, and I'm a big like spreadsheet nerd. So I have like a lot of Excel sheets where I track all of my projects and all of my deadlines and my inventory of stuff. You know, it's just, I think all of that is stuff that I hadn't really realized would be such a big part of the art business. So yeah, maybe that was the hard part, kind of learning how to stay organized. Like right now I have a lot of projects happening with different deadlines and different clients, and I'm doing some stuff for Trekell, and I'm doing some stuff for this person over here, and I'm doing, you know, all over the map. So staying on top of it and not stressing out about your to-do list, I think, is something that I am improving at. Okay, so I think that right now we are at a ghost image part of this where we can probably start thinking about making it look like what it's supposed to look like. But before I do that, I'm going to put down a background. So yeah, full coverage means including the background, and that is a big landmark for me with paintings. At that point, I very often like go get a snack or like walk away or go do something or even quit for the day. Full coverage basically to me means like you know, we have landed, the piece could be done at any moment. It isn't, because it's still too minimalist for me, but once the entire thing is covered in paint, then you're just edging closer and closer to the finish line, and you really get to decide on the fly where that finish line is. I ruin paintings by overworking them. I used to do that a lot worse than I do now, but it is freeing, because it means like, okay, I am at a place. I can keep working. I can bail. This could be done. It could be not done. But I couldn't quit here, you know? Okay, so deciding a background color. I know I have a plan that I want this little guy's eyeballs to be like pretty bright red, I think. I think I want the background to balance that out. My reference image has a black background. That doesn't matter. That is not relevant to me. I think I'm going to do something warm because this is very blue. I think I'm going to do something reddish because I think it'll highlight the eyeballs I'm planning on putting on him. So let's see, kind of a burgundy. I want to make sure that my subject pops off of it, so I don't want it too dark, and I also don't want it too light. This paint out of the tube is close. I think I maybe wanted a little bit more orangey. I think orangey might actually, as I'm figuring this out, might pop off that blue a little bit. So I'm gonna make kind of I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here. So we're mixing, but we're not just mixing to mix the colors, we're mixing to correct the consistency of the paint. I will die on that soapbox, by the way. I say this every time I do any live thing, is correct the consistency of your paint, add some water, mix the pigment, stretch out the binder. So yeah, if you take a single thing away from this, make it that the point of mixing paint is not just to mix the color and make it look even and pretty. It truly is about the consistency. And doing this over and over and over again is why I'm not going to have to do five layers to get this to look opaque. Backgrounds, because they're a big flat area, sometimes take 2 coats, but this should not take more than 2 coats. Okay, so I'm going to use the background to carve out my shape a little bit. So we're going to look back at our reference. I think that this paint is about what I want. An overloaded brush is also a problem, so you see me wiping paint off a lot. You want the majority of the paint to be really just at the end of your bristles. Probably 2/3 of your bristles should be painty. You can see a little residual on here on mine, but it's not saturated. The pigment is really not trapped up in here. It's all in the bottom of the brush. That keeps it from beading and clumping up, and also make sure that it'll keep drying fast enough. So, okay, so looking at our reference, let's start to carve our shape. So I'm actually going to cut that in more than I had put it. So yeah, the beauty of acrylic is you can just paint over stuff. That's another question I get a lot is, what do you do if you make a mistake? Paint over it.
So when you were talking about overworking your paintings sometimes, and you just take a breath and just paint over it, or you just scrap it.
If it's fixable, so if I overwork a painting and have ruined it, or what I think is ruining it, I will stop looking at it for a while. If I look at something too long, I feel like I can't see it anymore. So like sometimes when I finish pieces, or when I think I finish pieces, I have to put them away for a day and then look at them the next day, and then I'm like, oh, I totally missed this, or oh, maybe I should have whatever. So if I feel like I ruined something, I stop looking at it immediately, and then I will return to it in however long, in a day or two, and decide, can I block back out over what I did and try to build it back up, which is rare, or do I sand it down, re-prime it, and start over? And that usually is the answer. Which is fine. You kind of get used to that, honestly. Like, I think a lot of people don't share those failures online or on their socials, but I promise you they're happening a lot more than it seems like they are. I mess up paintings plenty. I've also messed up varnish, and that really sucks, because if your painting is where you want it to be, and then you like put down clumpy varnish or something accidentally, or streaky varnish, then like it's ruined. That's a bummer. Acrylic varnish is not very forgiving. Okay, so I went edge to edge when I did that. By the way, I started here and worked around. That's to let this part dry for one, but also just to kind of keep moving away. The wettest part is the part that follows your brush, and trying to get even and flat, you know, kind of with things like watercolor, they refer to it as like a bead. So it's like where the moisture is. I just try to keep all of that, keep the wet part in one designated area. So the wet area is just moving this way. When I go to do a second coat, I think this will need a second coat for the background. I'm going to start on this side again and know that by the time I get over here, this should be dry enough. So instead of like doing it piecemeal, doing it kind of edge to edge, lets me keep moving. I don't take a lot of breaks normally when I work. I try to finish something in a sitting. Yeah, all right, so that is pretty opaque. If you're gonna paint a background in a notorious problem color like yellow, I usually paint out the entire background in white first. Same with like oranges and some stuff that that fights you a little bit. But heavy pigment colors like this, you should just be able to go straight at it. that wind, it sounds like the apocalypse is happening outside right now. It is crazy.
Was it windy in LA?
No. It wasn't until I crossed the mountains and then it was like, oh, what's going on here? When you do a second coat, by the way, it is way less careful. Like that first coat, I'm like, watching all the edges and being whatever, but like my second coat, I'm just kind of blabbing paint down on here. So, truly, once you get to this point of full coverage and you're not trying to cover up the color of the panel anymore, the rest of the painting goes pretty fast, especially if you are sensitive to not overworking it. This doesn't need 100 more layers. It needs a couple, but not that much. In some areas, I might like barely touch. Okay, that's good enough that I'm gonna leave it alone. And while that dries for now, let's go back in. I'm going to graduate to a smaller brush. Let's see, maybe this one. Shop towels also, by the way, are your best friends. They cost nothing at Home Depot. Okay, I want to start refining some shapes. What I have at this stage is a block out of the entire painting, but I need it to start actually looking like something. When I learned how to do figure painting, which is actually one of the ways that I originally learned painting, which was with oil, my teacher always said that first it looks like blobs, then it looks like a person, then eventually it looks like Steve. And so we've gotten to the point where it was blobs, it kind of looks like a person. So now we're going to actually try to make it look like the reference specifically. So it's like comes into focus with the layers. I'm still not going to go black, but I am going to edge into the darkest color here. Okay. So some stuff, I might totally cover a shape that I had previously made. And in other cases, I might let bits of it poke out. But let's put his little eyes on here.
Another question from Zoom.
Sure.
Do you find that you reach the most clients from a specific social media or through another avenue?
I don't know. But honestly, I probably reach the most clients through like Instagram, maybe. A bunch of artists right now are complaining about Instagram because some of the algorithm stuff has been changing pretty rapidly. It's favoring video content so significantly that it's burying a lot of artist posts. So I think that for a lot of people, Instagram really has kind of been the way to reach people, but I'm kind of feeling something in the water on that a little bit. I don't know how long that's going to be true, which I think might be a little frightening for some people. I try to diversify as much as I can. I post things on Reddit, I post things on TikTok, I have a mailing list where I kind of share my goings on. So I try to be a lot of places. It's hard to tell where stuff comes from, but you get the most instant feedback from like Instagram. So I assume a good amount of it has to be coming from that. But honestly, it's kind of hard to tell. Okay. So I'm very obviously making this up as I go. Looking at my reference, making decisions. Maybe I'm gonna put this here. If I don't like it, I will paint over it. We're winging it.
Do you have gallery representation?
Do I have gallery representation? Not singular. I work with a few different galleries, and I just kind of produce work with different people for different things. But I don't have a singular rep. I don't think I want that. I know that for some people they benefit from it because they don't have to worry about like their own sales and stuff. But I'm pretty comfortable with my online store format and my like direct to client means of doing things. So I'm not feeling like that needs to be part of my thing. I don't know. Some people are really serious about the gallery representation thing. I haven't quite figured out what that would do for me.
All right, we have another question from Zoom. I hope you're ready for it. Where, why, how did you come up with the name The Obanoth?
Oh my God. It's Swedish for, I'm kidding. It doesn't mean anything. It is a totally made up thing. My actual name, Hannah Webb, is really, really common. And when I was trying to build an art website, you know, you Google yourself, you Google your name. And I learned that there is a very famous Midwestern beauty queen country singer named Hannah Webb. So she shows up when you Google my actual name. There's also a young gymnast, dancer with a significant online presence named Hannah Webb. So part of it was birthed from like trying to solve the Google problem. The rest of it is because I used to want to be more anonymous. I don't care as much now, but kind of hiding was something that I used to care about a lot. Being a girl on the internet can be kind of an unpleasant experience. So I chose a name for a long time that would let my work be at the forefront instead of, you know, oh, look, Hannah is sharing work. It was more like, oh, look, this artist is sharing work. And that I think spared me from some unpleasantness. But the word itself doesn't mean anything, except it is only mine. So if you search that, you only see my work, which is great. Obviously, I care a lot less about trying to be anonymous at this stage of my life, but when I was younger, I've also always had a full-time job, and I kind of liked that I sort of had this as a side project, as a separate thing, so that I could still kind of have my career stuff over here, and then have my art stuff sort of as its own kind of entity. Yeah, that name in particular, though, I kind of chose forever ago as a screen name, as a handle. But at this stage, I don't think I could change it because I think it's recognizable enough that people only know me as that. I'm getting paint all over your table, by the way. Okay. It's another kind of funny thing about the way that I work is that the paintings, all of the paint is in very specific, careful places, but it ends up all over me and all over my desk, which I think is what, like, maybe just a byproduct of having, like, being so careful and whatever on the piece itself. It's funny. Okay, so I just tried to cover, I had a couple, they're called holidays, which I've always thought was cute, but little holes in your paint where you can kind of see through them. That happens, and I just try to re-dampen any area where I might still have wet paint to cover them up as they pop up. A lot of this is like playing continuous cleanup and, like returning to areas and trying to keep, trying to keep it going, but it really, kind of like I was saying before, it really is not one shot the way that it looks or the way that it is assumed. Okay, so I want to put down an eyeball, but there is no way in the world that I could put yellow or red on top of that super dark blue. So I'm going to make a white shape so that I can paint on my details in a minute. When you put down any white or black, you really are reminded how mid-tone the painting really is. So like this, the lightest part here is not close to white and the darkest part here is not close to black. That is on purpose, you know, I mean, again, we're trying to get to the point where it is like balanced and everything with color primarily, and then, you know, all of our highlights and lowlights kind of happen after. So this white is going to get covered back up. This is just placeholder, so we can put color on this. Okay, so now that looks freaky. I want to put a little, so he's got kind of a little nose nostril shine there. It's not white, but it is lighter than that. So now that we've gotten to the point where we can start doing slightly detailed things. Mixing, mixing. Okay. Let's see here. So I obviously am doing this with flat brushes and square shapes and blah, blah, blah. This applies to anything. You can use blendy shapes. You don't have to do this in this super hard edge, whatever, like I do. A lot of this applies to just painting technique in general. So like the big to small, the tonal stuff. You know, I think that when people see artist demos, they want to walk away like feeling like they've learned really only that artist's thing or kind of their trick, but a lot of this is just sort of big picture foundation stuff. So I always say that, like, you know, the goal should not be as somebody who's learning to paint, the goal should not be to paint like the person you're watching. The goal should be to paint like yourself. You should be trying to learn how you want to paint, and be picking apart lessons that, you know, lessons and bits that can be applied to your own stuff. If you would like to paint with little squares and stuff like I do, that's obviously totally fine. But you know, a lot of what you, I think, pick up from other artists is not actually relevant to their style. I think a lot of it is mostly just relevant to their studio practice. How are we on time, Courtney?
1 o'clock right now, so we still have 30 minutes.
All right. So obviously this is slower because I am talking. But the whole process goes pretty fast if you're able to, again, like work on top of your layers really easily and quickly. So the thin, watered down paint thing lets me finish stuff fast, which again, for me is important. It's not important for everybody, but definitely a big consideration piece for me. Keep seeing me do this. It's because I just keep dragging my hand through this, which is very normal for me. Fixed. Okay, one of the other things that I like to do here, so because all of my backgrounds are kind of like singular dynamic color, I don't want them to take away from the piece, but I also don't want the background to be irrelevant to the piece. I usually try to do some kind of framing or haloing a little bit with my background. I try to keep it really minimal. But I think that it makes it feel like right now it feels like the subject is sitting on red. I want it to feel like it's sitting in red. So that's why I tend to put marks sort of between the subject and its background to do that. I also tend to use the background color have it show up in the actual subject. So if you look through my paintings, you'll see a lot of the time I sneak little bits, little dollops of the background color somewhere, like into the shadow shapes, because I feel like it makes it feel like it is being sunk into its background a little bit instead of just resting on top of it. I don't want to overdo it because I don't want the background to take away, and I really don't want the next color that I make here to be very different than the background color I already have. Scoot this so you can see it. So my background color is pretty red. It was kind of a red and yellow. I'm going to do this little halo color, just a step lighter, lightening with yellow, not with white. Okay. So I like to put this in areas where there might be detail to come. So I'm probably going to put a little fuzz on these ears. So I think maybe that would be a good opportunity to put this here. I feel like that might balance that when I do it. It's kind of fuzzy over here too. Let's add a little bulk on this side. So all of these are just decisions on the fly based off of what I think would look good based off of the shapes I have made so far. So that also is another kind of FAQ for me, is like, how do you decide where to put shapes, or like, do you decide all of them in advance? And the answer is no. It's just sort of based on how the piece is growing. So I wasn't sure until I had put down all of these shapes, that I would add these little halo shapes on this side. It wasn't part of the original plan, but aesthetically or graphically, I feel like this is just a place that would benefit from it. So that's why I make the decision, as it comes up.
You say it's more like a feeling?
Totally. Absolutely,
so
a feeling.
You feel like it's like a weight, like it's a weight thing, like a text, like a physical weight, or is it like an emotional feeling?
Oh man.
That's the way I feel sometimes. I'm like, I agree. It feels like a feeling, but
well, so okay, so I'll try to talk this out as best I can. So I don't want this to go all the way around it. That seems like too much. I do, though. I can't stop here because this feels visually uneven to me. So this light shape is on here. This needs something, but where? I don't want to over render this because I want my focal point to be here. So maybe as means to keep this simple but not boring, I should add a little bit of another shape here so to take the pressure off of this empty space. Or I maybe could put it on the bottom side of this ear because I kind of have it on the top side of this here ear there, and then maybe that would make kind of a diagonal shape coming. So like this is kind of the, you know, the swim, and then ultimately I just kind of decide where I think it. I mean, you just eventually have to pick, I guess. So I am going to put it down on the bottom because I do think that I want to keep the body simple. I think that was the right move. And I think that it would benefit from something near that other ear still. Now that I have put that and I can balance, okay, I can see something going here. I don't want it to be too low, too close to that, because I think that would add too much activity here, and I don't want to take away again from here. Up top could work, but I already feel like there's something up top. I don't think it needs it, so I'm going to set this down here. Yeah, okay, great, done. So yeah, a lot of decision making on the fly. I think that my white shapes are ready to accept eyeball color, so I'm going to do that next. Let's see, I think I want a brighter red. This makes the fourth color on my palette. So far I just have dark blue, which I'm treating as my black. I have white. I have a yellow and kind of a neutral reddish that became that. So let's make something real zingy. It's kind of a magenta reddish, and I'm going to add some yellow to make it even more kind of neon color. Another thing about when you record videos to post on social media, I don't rotate my panel at all. I try to keep it in one place because it makes the video cleaner because things aren't like flying and spinning all over the place, especially when they're sped up. When I'm painting in real life, though, I do tend to spin the panel so that I can make primarily downward facing paint strokes. I just feel like I can get them a little bit more even that way. When I do record things to post on social and don't spin around, what you don't see is that I really am moving my body around a lot more, but that would be a little bit weirder here, so I'm just going to spin the panel.
Do you have any advice on how to make more confident brush strokes?
Yeah, how to make confident brush strokes. Honestly, this might sound not helpful, but like you just got to commit. You just have to put something down, and honestly, like it might be not a good mark, and you can paint over it, or you can leave it, or you can just move on to the next painting. Putting things in the wrong place, is just part of it. My thing is that I am thoughtful about every mark that I make. Some people, when they work, just kind of which is great and just a different approach. For me, like every time my brush touches the panel, I am thinking about exactly where it is going. So I just made the darkest color that I have so far. I am gonna kind of try to refine around this mouth a little bit, but I'm probably gonna make 3 or 4 marks, and I am going to put them very specifically in very specific places. And if I don't like them, well, that's too bad. But I mean, yeah, you just kind of have to commit. When I was starting out, I used to just make more marks. So I would just make like noisier looking paintings because they would just have more bits going on. But at this point, I try to make sure that every paint stroke I make counts for something, which forces me to slow down and be a little bit more decisive. But it happens pretty often that I put something down that I am not happy with, and oh well. I mean, you could try to fix it, or you could just accept it and build on top of it and make it work. You know, but yeah, I mean, you just kind of have to pull the trigger, I think, with shape stuff. And yeah, I mean, it works out more often than you think it will if your approach is really slow like this. Because I am moving slowly enough that it is unlikely that I am going to put something down in the wildly wrong place. Maybe not exactly in the right place, or I might not love it, but I probably am not gonna like do something super crazy and then go, oh my God, why did I do that? Because it is like slow. Making a finished piece of art in an hour is arguably fast, but my actual process, mixing, deciding, putting down a stroke at a time, is slow. So like the process feels very slow and deliberate and decisive, but ultimately working in that way does let you like move through a piece pretty quickly overall. So it, you know, the process seems slow, but the execution ultimately is fast. But yeah, very slow and decisive, which again is just the way that I work. It does not have to be that way.
We have 3 questions on Zoom.
I love 3 questions on Zoom.
All right. Do you find it worth the investment to hire accountants or other business people for writing contracts, taxes, money management, etc.? Or do you, as a successful artist, find it worth your time to manage both the business and art side of this type of career?
That is a great question. I handle all of my own invoicing and all of that stuff, but I have a CPA, this poor person who I send stacks of stuff to at tax time every year. I do not do my own taxes. Because I would miss stuff. That goes to someone else. But all the businessy stuff, like the whatever, the W-9, 1099 stuff, and the invoicing, and that, like the tracking all of my stuff, I do all of that myself. That was a learning curve. And what I learned is basically just to keep records, keep track, and it's just gotten better over the years. Like whenever I would make an expense studio related, I used to just like write it in a living Word document just so that I had it somewhere, because I wasn't sure like what am I going to do with this information? How is this going to affect me at tax time, whatever. And at this point, after doing that and giving my CPA Word documents and stuff, he's like, okay, Hannah, why don't you do it this way? Why don't you, and has helped me nudge that side of it in the right direction. But like, just keep track of your stuff was my introduction into being good at this, better at this, certainly.
How long have you been painting/shooting art, and when did you notice you started to gain an audience?
That is a good. So I have been working with no audience for a long time. I used to not really have social followers, whatever, which was fine. I've kind of talked about this before, but I thought that I should be making an effort to make work that people wanted from me. So like, I used to do a lot of digital work. I used to do a lot of stuff that I thought maybe had the potential to be popular, or like was what people wanted, or it was trendy or something. And I used to spend a lot of time trying to solve that, and then realize that like, who are you talking to? Like you're just talking to nobody. You're making work, like you're presenting it like a sales pitch to people that aren't even shopping. Like it eventually feels silly to be really caught up with your social stuff. And the irony is that when I stopped trying, I stopped working digitally because I never really cared about it. I was just doing it because I thought that was hip, and I was doing like pop culture caricature stuff and whatever, because I don't know, it just seemed like something that would be popular. When I cut all of that out and just like started making work for myself and focusing on my own thing, that's when people started to care about following along. So, you know, after trying to play the game and to like, hey everybody, here's what I have for you today, which everyone's like, I didn't ask for that. When I started sharing instead, like, here's what I made today. I am a painter, I did this for myself. I did this in my studio. Here's how I did it. Here's how long it took, whatever. People were interested in that. So yeah, but I was creating work with like no followers for a very long time, and I just didn't let that be the reason why I was making work, you know? Like, if what you're doing is just for like internet applause, you know, then maybe you're not doing this for the right reasons. It's tough. It's tough when you see other people, I mean, and you know, me a little bit now, like I have a following, so like easy for you to say, but it didn't happen for a long time. And if you look at my socials, I have been posting like every day for a million years. And if you bother to scroll that far back, you'll see like, you know, a couple likes on most of that artwork for a long time. You know, but you make stuff for the right reasons. Make stuff because you care about making stuff. Like, it's tough to get that out of your head. But by the way, I have moved a little bit into detail stuff, kinda. We look a little freaky because we don't have any highlights in our eyes, but it's starting to look more and more like the reference. What I haven't touched is any of the light areas. I've done nothing in our light areas at all. So I think now that the dark areas are mostly good, I think it's probably time to do that. Okay. So my light areas, I had started to lean kind of yellowy green. So I'm gonna keep up with that. Maybe.
And then one of the last questions from Zoom is, do you use these same techniques when completing murals or large paintings?
Nope. You can't. I am learning my lesson on the murals thing. Doing large scale stuff, mural stuff is really fun, but is very challenging for me because it is so hard for me to relinquish control. And when you work that big, you just absolutely cannot hyper control it the way that I do with my other work. So no, like it's not a million miles away. Like I still want it to be shape centric. I still, want it to be color centric and high saturation and all this stuff. But you just can't make perfect edge shapes all the time, which is very frustrating for me. I am learning how to do large scale stuff, and it's fun because it is a new challenge. But you really do have to abandon a lot of the things that you are used to doing with your work. Just to see that big, first of all, I mean, just like the literal paint application is wildly different. I have learned that I can get pretty close to what I want by using roller brushes. So like big flat rollers kind of give me the shapes that I want, but not, I don't know, I'm getting there.
You have about 10 minutes left. I'm sorry, I
Okay.
didn't cut you off. Go ahead.
So do you just like paint the whole mural in like miniature, like, smaller scale first, and use that as your blueprint?
I've tried to start by doing a small scale version. Actually, I did a piece on the side of Art Supply Warehouse in Westminster, California, and that I started with I painted a painting and then used that as my reference. I've also, sometimes I do those digitally. So I'll do like a digital sketch, digital comp, which is kind of easier if it's for a client that or a stakeholder that really wants to see what it'll look like. So I use digital occasionally for that kind of stuff. I've tried to just wing it. That didn't turn out at all. Yeah, so I feel like I need a plan, a little bit of a plan. Yeah, the mural stuff is fun, but is it like doesn't resemble this process to me. It feels like a totally separate thing. So this is like a 1/4 inch brush that I'm using, and I'm probably not really going to go smaller than that. I don't think that I have a good reason to. Maybe for a little highlight on the nose or in the eye, but that's probably about as small as I want. My paint is drying and I'm running out of it, so I got to mix that color again. Some of these light colors are taking more than one coat, which is okay. And it tacks over fast enough that I mean, I only let that dry for, you know, again, 20 seconds before I
Are you using white now, or is that still an off-white?
It is an off-white. It is white and yellow. So I avoid white until I absolutely need it. I really want to keep white in the eye for the highlight, and I might make a little nose shine if it needs it. So yeah, there's still no white and there's still no black on this painting. I don't have black paint out, actually. And because we have 10 minutes, we may not have it at all. I often don't put black on my palette. Usually a dark pigment color is fine. This blue out of the tube is so dark that it is pretty close. And I just find it a little bit more visually interesting. It's like fully sideways in there. Yeah, okay. Well, as I put kind of final touches on here, does anyone have any other like questions maybe beyond what I'm doing presently? Any general questions, studio question? Uh-oh. Thank you. Okay. Uh, so, so now all of our small shapes are here, and we've got a couple large boring areas here. I'm just gonna make like 1 or 2 big shapes just to break that up a little bit more, but I'm not gonna render any of the open areas. I don't think it's necessary. So let's just do, I don't know if you can even see this mark on camera, but again, acrylic dries faster or darker, sorry, than when you put it down. We're gonna make a couple little baby marks. And that's mostly it. Are you guys sticking around for the next demo? I think Andrew's next. He's super good. Very different approach. Okay, I'm gonna put a highlight and then Courtney's gonna kick me off of here.
I'm gonna throw you off the stage.
That's fine.
We gotta do the raffle afterwards, so.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Turn the video off whenever you're done.
Okay.
Donna said thank you.
Who?
Donna.
Oh.
Zoom.
You're welcome, Donna. Okay, so like my very last marks are my little tiny little baby highlights here. This is the first time I've used pure white in this entire painting. And yeah, that's about it. If I were doing this in my studio, I would probably maybe spend a little bit more time. I think that there's a couple areas that I probably could keep pushing a little bit, but that is most of it. When you do these things live, you know, you kind of get what you get out of the piece, but.
Looks great.
Yeah, okay, all right. I'll give you your stage back.
That's it.
Yeah, okay.
Awesome.
Ta-da. It was very sideways. That's what it looks like in real life. Sure.
I think you hold that in front of the camera too, and then you will sign off.
Where's the oh.
Yeah, right there.
Oh.
Perfect.
Ta-da.
All right, thank you, everybody.